Welcome to the Spoken Word. My name is Travis, your host, and we are going to start diving into how to understand the Bible better. That's what this whole podcast is about. We'll be both looking at the Bible as a piece of literature and how to understand it and try to bring out some of the problems that are involved with interpreting the Bible in the modern age. And we will also start just sort of telling the story of the Bible from a 30,000 foot view and help you see the broad strokes of the story of the Bible. And then maybe on down the road, we'll swing back around and look at specific lessons or things from the Bible that you can pull out that might be of importance and curiosity to people, maybe things that we don't talk about in the church as much. So regardless, this podcast represents one Christian's reflections on the story of the Bible, its contents, with the intent of helping people to understand it better. So with that, let's dive into our first lesson. Today, we will be talking about just appreciating the problem of understanding the Bible. Okay. So whenever you go down to a Christian bookstore or you pick up a Bible somewhere, you might get the impression that you should just be able to pick up this book and with a, standard level of education, you should be able to understand everything in this book. And that if you don't, you're an idiot. And unfortunately, I feel like that is the perspective that some people have when it comes to understanding the scriptures. But let's face it, the Bible is not a simple book by any stretch of the imagination. It has many different genres. It has poetry, it has historical literature, it has wisdom literature, it has apocalyptic literature, it has accounting records, it has genealogy, it has all sorts of things in it. So you can't just come to the Bible with some kind of blockheaded, literalistic perspective and expect to understand everything that's in the scriptures. The second thing is that we need to appreciate that we are separated from the Bible and its authors by time, by language, and by culture. So let's talk about that first one. So when was the Bible written? Well, in the Christian Bible, which is what I will just be referring to in this podcast as the Bible, the Christian Bible has kind of two separate divisions in it. There's the Old Testament, which is generally equivalent to what a modern Jewish person might call their Bible. So it's a collection of Jewish scriptures. And then the second part of the Bible that is not present in Jewish scriptures, but is present in the Christian Bible is the New Testament. And that part of the Bible details the story of Jesus, of his closest followers, and then the birth of the church, which would ultimately grow to become what it is today. So in those two separate subdivisions, the Old Testament was written somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000, 4,000 years ago, somewhere in that range. And the New Testament was written somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 years ago. So you're dealing with records that are multiple millennia old. So that's obviously going to bring up some issues, right? Because the way that people think, the way that people talk, the concepts that they have, all these kinds of things that would have been very familiar to someone living 4,000 years ago are probably not going to be very similar to how people think today. There are, of course, some cultural universals, but we just need to understand that when you read something in the scripture and you think to yourself, man, this does not make a whole lot of sense to me. Probably not just you. It's the fact that you're trying to interpret a really, really old document. And when you're dealing with other old documents besides the Bible, usually people understand that, well, the best people to interpret these things are going to be like PhDs, right? So to expect a average person with a average education to pick up the Bible and understand every single word of it is just a little bit absurd. And I think it's a travesty that we put that kind of expectation on people. The other problem that we have is language. The Bible was not written in English. It was not, uh, the King James Bible was not the first version of the Bible. The texts of the Bible were originally written in Hebrew in the case of the Old Testament, or they were written in Greek in the New Testament. There is, importantly, just for your education and to be aware of, somewhere around the time of Jesus, a few hundred years before then, some Jewish scholars took the Hebrew Old Testament and translated it into Greek. And that translation is kind of commonly referred to as the Septuagint. So I only bring that up because sometimes when you're trying to trace a idea from the Old Testament Hebrew into the New Testament where things are in Greek, sometimes you can actually refer to the Septuagint and say, okay, how did people think about this? How did Hebrew people think about a Hebrew idea in Greek? And that's how they would put it in the Septuagint. So that can be a helpful linchpin between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Okay. But bottom line, the Bible was originally written in Hebrew and Greek. The things that you pick up today are the products of honest translators trying to sit down and understand the Hebrew and the Greek of the original texts of the Bible, and then try to convey their understanding of those Hebrew and Greek ideas into English or Japanese or whatever the target language is. Okay. So language always causes a problem for people who don't speak those languages natively, because there's always this layer of interpretation that has to happen for you to have something translated into your own language. For example, when you walk into say a Protestant church here in the West, sometimes people's favorite topic is to talk about the biblical ideas of love, where you can read through the parts of the New Testament and see this word love all over the place. Well, did you know that the word that's translated love there is not always the same? There are several different Greek words that have various nuances. Like, are you talking about love between two romantic partners? Are you talking about love between, siblings or parents or things like that? Like, what kind of love are you referring to? And when a translator comes to those pieces of Greek, they're limited by the English language, and we only have one word that kind of gives those ideas, and it's just love. So sometimes you lose nuance when you transfer ideas from one language to another, and that just adds a layer of complexity. The other thing is that we're separated from the Bible and its authors by our culture. The way the biblical authors thought about themselves, about the world around them, about just about everything in life is probably pretty different from how we think about things today. For example, whenever I say the word Earth, most of us probably think about this spherical planet that's orbiting around the sun and rotates on an axis and all this different stuff, right? That's our concept of Earth. So if you go to the beginning of the Bible and you read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and he created the earth, you probably think, oh, God created a planet. But to the original Hebrew hearers of that text, the word that's used for earth just basically means the ground. God created the sky and he created the ground. It wasn't really referring to a spherical ball called the earth. So all that being said, when we read the Bible, we're not only looking through layers of translation and interpretation by honest translators, we're also bringing our own culture, our own biases, those kinds of things to the text. And we have to be very cautious of reading the Bible in terms of our own culture. So with all these things in mind, um, interpreting the Bible well is a difficult task. So I like this comment by Tim Mackey over at the Bible Project. He expressed once that we often both distort what the authors meant and we simultaneously therefore miss what they were actually trying to say. So this is the whole problem of bringing your own culture, your own time, and your own language to something as old and as foreign to us as the Bible. So if we're going to be honest, we're going to be good students of the Bible, we do need to accept that it's going to be a cross cultural experience and be very aware of those things as we interpret the scripture. So how do we even begin to understand the Bible? Well, for one, do need to appreciate the problem. But second, there is some hope because for one, I want to reassure you that the translations that you have in your hand are very good. There is a lot of overlap in ideas and words and things like that between that are kind of universal to all languages. Like we all have an idea of ground. All have an idea of sky, right? We have these kinds of things. So it's not like the Bible is indecipherable or untranslatable. It's just that you can lose nuance if you come at it with a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel. So I want to reassure you, translations are very good, but there can be problems. There can be nuance that aren't the translator's fault. It's just an issue of English not being Greek and Hebrew. The other thing is that when those areas of nuance begin to matter, we have some very powerful tools that are available to anyone. For example, one of my favorites is called Bible Hub, and it is a website that contains pretty much every resource that someone would need to get started in beginning to think about the underlying original languages in the Bible. So, for example, one of my favorite examples is to look at a verse and if there's kind of like a key word in there. So I hope that helps. I hope that you learned something today and I will see you in the next episode. So thanks for listening and God bless.